like a permanent sort of nick in the Monroe Doctrine, in the legitimacy or at least the ability of the United States to maintain its control over the southern hemisphere of the super American continents, however you want to look at it. Yeah, exactly, exactly. So it represents. Do you think that's going to last? Do you think this is going to increase? What's your take on that, Michael?
Well, there's been an indication from Trump that if reelected, he would probably work out some deal with Russia to respect each other's spheres of influence, less Ukraine, Belarus areas, in exchange for less effort by Russia, maybe even China coming into Latin America and areas of U.S. influence, spheres of influence. It's very tricky right now. It's very nebulous. But China, China and Russia are not one. They each have their own individual spheres of interest and influence, and you've got to work with each one independent and to come to an accommodation. And it's very, very risky, tricky, especially when you're trying these multilateral arms agreements, arms reduction agreements. Even though the U.S. wants to do something with Russia, it doesn't include China. Well, we saw this with the Intermediate Range Ballistic Missile Treaty. They're both independent, even though they work together almost as an alliance on the Belt and Road Initiative. The Belt and Road Initiative has over 136 countries that have signed up. I mean, no one talks about it. Yet, it is going to be a major economic dynamo throughout the world. And that's what the U.S. sees right now, challenge, whether it's in Latin America, Africa, Europe. It's why Russia, why China rather, is looking upon itself the next economic power and probably will seek to achieve by 2050.
Wow. I mean, that's a really good point. I mean, because basically they spent. Oh, good. No, I'm sorry. Go ahead, finish.
China will have to develop a military that then protects those interests. That means that they will seek to have major military dominance, and that's why the U.S. now feels that it can no longer cut back or relent and have helped create this boogeyman. Rather than working with China, we now have a new competitor on the scene, and this actually works in the interest of the neocons to help justify all the military expenditures that we do annually. If you're going to have high military expenditures, you got to have enemies, right? So one goes
right. We create our monsters. We create our monsters. Like, regardless of what China wants to do, you're stuck in a situation that because one country is hostile, the other country almost has to be hostile in order to defend itself. Like the belligerence, it spreads.
Well, it
it's almost
didn't have to be.
Explain.
Work things with China. Yeah, we have trade issues. Those were being worked out, and we could have had, rather than declaring them to be adversaries of all stupid things, we could have been working much more closely and trying to be more proactive in trying to develop a relationship, just like we should have been doing the very same thing with Russia, but we have not. We have to have enemies. We have to have adversaries in order to justify our high military expenditure that helps create the jobs at home. Every state in the United States has some contribution to the military-industrial complex, and the services have strategically built it that way so that every state and every county in the United States benefits in order to, so that when it comes time renewal of budgets, every member of Congress has a stake in it. And if they renege, it's going to cost jobs. So you see how this permeates all the way down, trickles down to the local level throughout the United States.
What do you see? What do you see as the correct response to that? I mean, this is something you've clearly thought about for years, for decades. What do you see as some of the more exciting or better ways to solve that problem? Not even exciting, but just what's practical? What should we be focused on in our last minute or two?
Okay, well, I think that the United States, if Trump wins re-election, I see him probably trying to work more closely with Russia. I think that he's going to try to enter into better relationships with Moscow. unlike Biden. Biden is really anti-Russian at this point, based upon his comments. And I think having a Democrat administration in there, it's going to bode ill. It'll be more pro-Chinese, but the United States also could be working with Russia to have Russia help us with our relationship with China because of their basic alliance that they now have through the BRI and also strategic alliances. So I think it really depends upon whether you want to take a positive high road approach or a low road and be insidious and adversarial. It's really up to the leadership, and we need to cut out the neocons once and for all and get them out of the way.
So from our domestic policy, that's what you think is the most crucial. Looking at it locally, looking at it from our perspective as people within the United States, you would recommend strongly pushing out, disavowing neoconservatives from American politics and American foreign policy.
Yeah, because they've been very damaging. They're the ones who are pushing the approach with
about a minute
change, and just like what we're trying to do right now in what we did in Ukraine and what we're attempting to do now. We listen to Pompeo's words, just watching on a daily basis. He is the essence of the neocons in this administration right now, and he keeps pushing. And before him was Bolton. And what happened to Bolton? Finally, we got rid of him. But we're seeing this over and over again. And also regime change in Iran, and we cannot have that. We need Iran. Iran has a rich history. I think if we worked more closely with Iran, things would be better off. But what's happened is that our policies, whether it's toward Lebanon or Iran, has actually pushed these countries more eastward. And now what they're doing is developing their own currencies, and they're trying to divest themselves of any Western influence or working within the Western financial system. And
As
so
it happens, that's exactly the response that I think you'd expect to see with America in decline. That was the voice of Michael Malouf. Michael, thank you for joining us. He is a former senior security policy analyst in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, nearly 30 years of federal service in the DoD. We will be back tomorrow. Great show today. Thank you again for listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Guys, as always, I want to thank you for joining us. Had a lot of technical issues on this particular show. And so Mrs. Thomas is going to get work today where she is going to have to piecemeal the stuff together. But look, I want to thank you guys for joining us. It was, some of you may have to take my word for it. To be fair, though, 2 hours and 16 minutes of one of the shows was able to go through without any technical glitches or issues. And so the bulk of it is still up for you guys to watch. Also, the first segment of it is up for you guys to watch. Wow, this thing broke up pretty badly. Yeah, it's going to take a little work. But great show today. And I will see you guys in a few. So I'm going to say like, share, and subscribe. And because YouTube has changed around some items, I don't want to miss this. All right. Handout. Two-state solution is legalizing ethnic cleansing. Come on, here we are. Two-state solution is legalizing ethnic cleansing gains. This should be one secular state that treats all individuals equally regardless of ethnicity. I love that you said that. And this is one of those difficulties in regards to our world, that issues of justice, right, wrong, good, bad, all of that stuff really pales in comparison because it doesn't really exist in real terms. You have action and consequence, and you have people who may get advantage off of doing something that was utterly ghastly. Meaning, when the U.S. gets to America, and the U.S. says, we are going to expand, and there is a destiny for us to do this expansion. And the Native Americans are there and like, yeah, no. Now, what's right? What's wrong? What's just? What's fair? Well, you have a situation where people who are already on a particular land, new people come to a land, start kidnapping those people, and eventually move in, essentially massacring those people, those human beings, to the point of extinction almost, where now they have these little areas to which these people exist. There was no God that stopped that process. There was no God that came and said, hey, this isn't right at all. The only thing you had was a justification based on might in and of itself. Meaning we do it because we can do it. That's your world. That's all this is. That's the reality of things. In the case of that, you take that land, you take the gold, you take the oil, you take everything else that's on here, and you pass law. And in passing law, a substructure of reality, you then say, all right, now that these laws are in place, we can criminalize this, we can criminalize that. Entirely ignoring, intentionally, the point that everything that was taken by blood and by a sword or by a gun. Meaning it was all stolen. All of these people were murdered to make that take place. Nobody, X number of years later, cares. The gains in and of themselves were instantiated, were taken, and appropriated. And then all of these other value sets and everything else was based on the crime that had taken place. Where's justice in that process? It doesn't exist. I'm making the point that your reality doesn't necessarily bend towards justice, at least not all the time. And as human beings, those tribes, those groups were wiped out. And you can look like this all across the planet. This is not a justification. It's is what it is, what it is. When you're looking at the Israel-Palestinian issue, what you're basically seeing is what took place in America to the Native Americans in slow motion in modern times where everyone has cameras. And the same motifs take place where you have Israel is an alliance of America. So despite the fact that 80% of the 2,000 people that were killed in one intervention were civilians, that doesn't matter. Let's not talk about the kids that get murdered or the kids that get shot or the kids that get thrown in prison or the people that get thrown in prison or basically an open air ghetto that is allowed, that is accepted by the rest of the world because the United States and the media space of the United States says it's okay. If you could go back in time with the camera and watch the Native American situation, I bet you it would take a similar character. They're wiping out a group. Not because it's right, not because it's wrong, not because it's ethical, just, or anything else. It's just because they can. And the question for the rest of the world is that okay? And up to this point, the rest of the world has said, basically, yes. The deal with the UAE codifies it that much more, which is an instantiation of gains. I hate to tell people this, but just because something drastic and horrifying happened to Israel, Jews does not justify Jews committing a crime against somebody else. If African Americans and the slavery and all of the stuff that blacks endured, would it be just for African Americans to rise up right now and murder white people screaming about slavery? That would be a little weird. And I don't necessarily think it would fly. Nor do I think we would win for obvious reasons of guns and tanks and everything else. I'm making the point that one crime doesn't necessarily justify another crime. And in the very specific case of what is taking place here, you just basically have justice is not a part of this. It doesn't apply. And so, unfortunately, the question becomes, how does Palestinians get anything in this process when they have nothing to leverage in this process but themselves? And even when they leverage themselves, you have media spaces that turn around and point and say, look at those Palestinians and how angry they are, ignoring the fact that they're an open air ghetto. Look, man, I agree with you. I don't know how that works out. I mean, basically, you don't have a situation where the people involved are trying to actually get peace. You basically have what Israel knows that the U.S. will cover for us, regardless of what we do. There is nothing to stop us from taking the rest of this land. Western powers are not going to say anything about it. We have an association with the UAE right now as a political thing, whether it's real or not. It's political. It's there. And Saudi Arabia, who at one point bitched about it, now doesn't necessarily seem to care all that much and have diplomatic ties with Israel also. Where does it leave the Palestinians? And this note of clout, this note of influence, all of that stuff gets basically undermined by the relationships that these guys are forging in this particular area. So I agree with you in the sense that, look, if you're looking for a just solution, you're talking about one country. Israel immediately looks at that and says, well, you're trying to destroy Israel. Well, you've destroyed Palestine in your destruction, in your creation of Israel. Nobody seemed to care about that. It usually gets to the point where both sides get sick of the fighting. Both sides get sick of being at arms with each other. They punch each other in the face over and over and over again to the point where they're tired. The catch here is the United States has instigated itself. in this conflict, just like it has in many other conflicts, and looks at this stuff as a geopolitical thing from our standpoint and our alliances and the people that we will support, regardless of what those people do, as ghastly as it gets. It's a rational act for Israel, especially neocons, to take a perspective that says we're going to take it all. We don't have to give anything up. Why do we have to give anything up? Anything that we do is co-signed by the United States. No reason, no impetus, there's no force, no leverage for us to negotiate. And politics is typically about ideology and leverage. Yes, self-interest, but ideology oftentimes run in parallel with self-interest, and even at other times overwhelms what the person wants from the standpoint of self-interest. But in this particular case, it's geopolitical, right? And these guys want to steal this land. They have an ally that allows them to do so. And so they do it. Justice doesn't apply. Right, wrong, morality, none of those things apply. International law doesn't apply. International law doesn't exist. So I agree with you if you're saying let's cut down the hostility. The U.S. would need to get out of it, for one. That's the start. And maybe even put pressure to try to balance the equation from the amount of support that it had given for all those other years. Meaning cut off the billions. We have people who don't even have health care in this country. We're giving Israel billions of dollars. No, cut off those billions. Tether that billion to them coming to some kind of resolution. Not this faux diplomacy where you're acting as if you're doing something on behalf of Palestinians. It's nonsense. If you want to have an actual deal, have an actual deal. If you want those people to come together, you need to have earnest intent on both sides to put it to the end and have some kind of real resolution for it. I agree with you that and coming to a solution codifies a theft. By the same token, what is your solution? There is no justice. There's only cause and effect. And from the standpoint of a stronger power that was able to go in, instigate itself, steal the land, etc., well, you're in a weaker position at this point, and you have to come to a solution of what you're willing to accept and what you're not willing to accept. There is no such thing as justice. No, I don't love saying that, but it's true. Bernie promised to be a revolutionary. Let's see. Emblem of fate. Bernie's promise to be a revolutionary. Malicious milk became specifically what said not to support evil to earn my vote. Bernie was never a revolutionary. No, Bernie was not a revolutionary. He talked a good game, but he was never a revolutionary. Bernie has got to give up completely not voting for either. Michael Goodert, agree with you 1,000%. All right, guys, I'm going to end this here. Like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in a few. This is the after show.